Hi there, my name is Riker. I'm a game designer and a lecturer at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa. And today I want to talk about creative practice, coding, prototyping, and imposter syndrome. To put this whole story in context, here's some background about myself. I grew up in Germany on the countryside, which left me thinking for a really long time that I was really weird. And after some time it turned out that I'm a good amount of weird, but what's really weird is people on the countryside. After high school, I wanted to get the hell out of there. And I wanted to do something with art, something creative, but all the applications I sent out got rejected. So I had to get even more creative and lower my expectations. I came across this program that was going to start in the middle of the year. It was in Berlin. It had an easy online application and it said something about being creative and something with programming. And we laughed a lot at the idea of me doing something with programming. But then I applied anyway and I got in. So I was just going to go to Berlin, then change programs. But in my first year, I wrote my very first program, Tic-Tac-Toe, with 1,000 lines of code because I had no idea how functions worked. And I felt like I was becoming God. So I just kept going. I realized that I had so much more fun doing this than almost anything else I'd ever learned in school because I wasn't arguing with a teacher who didn't like my attitude. Instead, I was arguing with a computer, which is essentially like arguing with yourself. You can learn anything and achieve anything as long as you don't give up and you can tolerate feeling like an idiot for the majority of the time and feeling like a genius for a super tiny amount of the time. At 24, I moved to Copenhagen to study game design. Doing game design was really fun. There were a ton of other programmers there, and we were always paired up in teams. So there was always somebody there who was better at programming than me. And I got to do more fun stuff like art and design, but I just kind of stopped considering myself a programmer. I did, however, remember how empowering it was to learn something amazing like this. And I wanted that experience for the little kid that I used to be that was stuck in Awkward Town in the countryside and never thought she could do something as difficult and challenging as making games. So I decided to make educational games that teach kids coding. And with 2 friends, I started working on a game for our master thesis called Machineers, a super cute puzzle game about robots. After graduation, I started a company called Riker. I got a team, I got funding, published Machineers on Steam and a bunch of other platforms. It really didn't make any money. My team kind of found some other work and I had to take a break. That's what we call burnout in game dev. So after I'd recovered, I did the whole thing again. Found a new programmer to work with, started working on a new game that teaches kids coding in a new way. This time by moving a baby humpback whale with text commands. And this time I wasn't going to make the mistake of trying to publish it by myself again, because that is not what game developers enjoy doing. No thank you. There's a simple trick to be a game developer and never burn out, and that is to never finish your games and just move on to the next shiny thing. In case you can't tell, I'm joking a little bit, but there's always a bittersweet truth about these kind of jokes. What you think making the game is actually making a prototype, and that is fun. And if you don't know any better, you'd assume that you're kind of 70% done. In game dev, we like to say that the first 90% of development is super fun. It's the second 90% that kind of suck. Game dev ages you about 10 times the normal speed, and most people leave the industry within 4 years. You probably think I'm exaggerating, so here's a couple of fun facts. As an indie dev, making games can take up easily 4 to 5 years. In bigger productions, probably more. If you're 25 by the time you graduate and you want to retire by the age of 70 and leave some buffer for burnout, natural disasters, kids, which could be the same thing, you can make about 8 or 9 games in your entire career. When you realize how little time you really have and how few games you really get to devote your time to, you will understand that sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away. Whew! Things got a little heavy there. In 2017, I had reached a turning point in my life. I was either going to settle down, buy an apartment in a place that was so comfortable, hygge, as they like to say in Denmark. My entire professional career had been built there, my whole friendship circle there, or I could leave everything I knew behind, jump into the unknown, and see if me and this really cute boy were gonna hit it off. I decided to jump, to change careers, start full-time teaching, and move to South Africa. I mean, what's continents at this point, right? It turns out it wasn't like moving from Germany to Denmark at all. It was more like cutting your arm off and trying to grow a new one. One of the most difficult transitions for me was, who am I now? Can I still call myself a game developer now that I'm not full-time game developer? Now that I'm not working in the industry? You know what this is. You have felt this before. This is what they like to call about imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is when you think you really suck at something, even though you don't. It could be that you look at other people and think, well, I'm nowhere near as good as they are, and I'm not as talented. Maybe you think that training could one day get you there, but more likely you're gonna think that you're just not really cut out for this. And if you don't say anything, maybe nobody will notice. But eventually, you'll just have to admit to yourself that you were kidding yourself the whole time. Pretty much everyone has felt like this one time or in one area of their life. Even people who you think are rock solid, like your teacher or your mom or me. If we're really being honest, even when we look really confident, speak publicly in a foreign language, make really cool videos, we all doubt ourselves sometimes. Sometimes we don't really know what we're doing, and this doesn't have to be a bad thing. Yes, it can be scary, but when you jump and you land on your face, you know that you can take it and survive. And if you land on your feet, you think you can do anything, and that energy can fuel you to achieve true greatness. But you can't get there from a place of comfort. Okay, back to our story. When I teach game design in 4th year, there are a lot of people that don't know programming. So I decided to have them make a game in Twine instead. Because anyone can do that, right? I don't know where you all stand on the debate on Twine. Most of you probably think that what you do in Twine is text adventures and branching narratives. If you think right now that that is all that Twine is and that is all it can ever be, your mind is about to get blown. I didn't want my students to simply make a branching narrative. I wanted them to use sound, images, and CSS, but most importantly, rules and variables to be affected by a player choice and to affect the visual appearance of the game and the outcome. So I figured how to do rock, paper, scissors in Twine. And then I thought, okay, so what other things would lend themselves well to demonstrate game loops in a text adventure? So I was making a quiz, pretty straightforward. These were still quite basic though, because they had a very simple correct or wrong choice based on clicking a word, which is not that exciting. So I thought about implementing the goat, wolf, cabbage problem. And then I started creating a bunch of game mechanics that would be interesting for students to use. So I made a keypad and a mini shop. My students took this brief and ran with it, and what they created was mind-blowing. One of my favorite games was a story about what it's like to live with OCD, and you should absolutely check it out on itch.io. I decided to also make my 2nd year students create a game in Twine, and they hated it. And that gave me an excuse to figure out a bunch of interesting things on how to manipulate CSS, implement a day-night cycle, a basic state machine, and even utilizing the keyboard instead of always clicking stuff. Why not bash the keyboard and simulate fake hacking? In the remaining months of 2020, I kept working on small little prototypes for fun, like this super cute RPG farming simulator that you can control with text commands. Here is where I discovered that you could make objects with properties and group them in lists, and I definitely went overboard on this one. I also made a Tamagotchi with 3-frame animations, sound recorded from my mouth, and implemented my very first state machine. I also made this thing. This is a syllable maker for the constructed writing system Easy Backlit. This is something I'm doing for my PhD, and it would take way too long to explain right now. I also made a game of memory that is only using colors, and it's impossible to play for colorblind people. Sorry about that. And as I kept making these prototypes, my boyfriend kept looking over my shoulder and he said, I think it's time for you to move to Unity. And are you sure that's how you're meant to use Twine? And he also kept encouraging me and telling me whether or not I or anyone else realized it. I was a real programmer. So at that point, I was already doing it and still doubting myself. Imposter syndrome be like that. In October, I wanted to join Inktober. I decided to start learning how to use this little volumetric modeling tool called Clixels. And every day of October, I made a diorama. Some of them with animations and particle effects. And I learned how to light stuff nicely in Unity. Making these was a fantastic lesson, because I only had like 2 or 3 hours each day to make them, and I had to finish and post before going to bed, so I had to make some really tough choices, and I learned a lot. After that, things started really getting out of control. I started making Snake, and then I figured out how to do a leaderboard, which was really interesting. I made a dating simulator, which was a huge miss, and I had to abandon it. And then in December, I made this cute little typing game about good communication and relationships. So then me and my boyfriend decided that in 2021, we were going to make 12 games in 12 months to get really uncomfortable, learn a ton of stuff, and really prioritize learning our craft, game design. We're only 3 months in at this point of making this video, so here are the first 3 prototypes, all available on my Edge page. For January, I decided to take a little Tamagotchi game that I'd made earlier in 2020 and port it to Unity. That way I didn't have to worry about design or assets and could focus on learning the basics of Unity. First thing I did was take the images and hook them up to the animator. Then I made a bunch of buttons to trigger the animations. There were a couple of glitches, but it was a good start. I made some progress bars and a basic state machine that counts stats like hunger and happiness up or down depending on what the puppy is up to. Next, Good Boy learned how to talk. These little affirmations made him feel a lot more real and helped me communicate feedback to the player, but also realism. As you all know, puppies poop a lot, so I had to figure out how to instantiate poop prefabs during runtime. Halfway through the month I realized that I had already implemented the core of my game, so I could move on to my stretch goal, making a new character with Klexels. When it comes to animations, I don't really know what I'm doing, so I introduced a bunch of bugs, and Good Boy went a little psychotic for a while. I linked a button to another scene with the original graphics. This way people with less powerful machines could still play with this puppy, because Klexels is chowing performance. The UI got an overhaul as well. And finally, one of the weirdest and proudest game dev moments, animating Good Boy smelling its own poop. In February I decided that since I've always wanted to know more about the ovarian reproductive system, I wanted to make a game to help me get really cozy with this. I started off by modeling the uterus, ovaries, and fallopian tubes. I rotated a camera around when you click drag and set up a bunch of close-up cameras with Cinemachine. Each one focuses on one important aspect of the model. A big challenge was modeling the insides and creating cross-sections. I'm a 3D modeling noob. Klexels made the process super easy. I wrote a script that turns these cross-sections on and off depending on which camera is active. I animated a follicle or egg moving from the ovary to the uterus, animated the camera to focus on where the action is at, and made particle effects for the blood, and mapped everything to a timeline slider that could be scrubbing backwards or forwards. As a last step, I animated the cross sections so it looks a lot more like a CT scan, and made the UI look pretty. And then a little bit more detail inside the ovary. There were so many more things that I was going to do with this project, like properly animating the follicular cycle, showing how the hormones work, allowing players to click parts and get more information about them. But I had to focus. 12 and 12 makes you do that. Making 12 games in 12 months has been teaching me a lot. In February, I learned that not everything has to be as polished and finished as you want it to be. Development is done when you say it is. In March, I went back to my fave, Twine, and decided to make a game about washing your hands, so I could learn more about mouse control stuff. I started by making a bunch of placeholder graphics, making the right hand follow the mouse cursor, and allowing the player to rotate tabs and turn the water on and off. Then I set up some progress bars for important stats like dirtiness, water temperature, soapiness, and wetness. I made the left hand mimic the movements of the right hand, allowed the player to pick up the soap, and made the progress bars react to what the hands were doing. Notice how the hands are cropped at the edge of the image? This is done by code and was a pain to figure out, but it made all the difference. I made some proper graphics in hand-drawn style. 2 poses for the left hand and 4 poses for the right hand. Each of those got a basic layer and overlays for dirt, soap, and water. That is 24 individual hand graphics. And here I was thinking I was making something tiny. Finally I added the sounds, some graphics for winning and sparkles for when you're all clean, and polished everything up with some sweet CSS animations.
Oh, that's clean.
Being a game developer is really difficult. You're constantly challenging yourself to do things you've never done before. And no matter how experienced you are, it will never stop being a challenge. That can be a good thing, or a bad thing if you can't figure out how to keep loving yourself even though you're failing to make noticeable progress. There are so many specializations, roles, hats to wear, and it often isn't clear who you are and what you're really good at. You always know somebody who's so much better at what they're doing than you are, but what you don't know is that that person actually doubts themselves exactly the same way that you doubt yourself. This self-doubt can either eat you up and make you feel like shit, or it can make you keep getting better. And that's where you want to be. When I chose to leave the industry and become a full-time teacher, an academic even, I mourned my loss of status. I thought I was done making real games, and it took me a long time to realize I wasn't done. I was free. I may never again have to make games that are polished, that have to be sold to keep me alive. I can make whatever I want, for however long I want to, about whichever topic I choose to. And I can actually do it myself, without needing help. The confidence that this little experiment has given me is undeniable. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Set yourself challenges. You don't have to use Twine or do 12 and 12 or Claytober, but try to do something that makes you uncomfortable just as much as it excites you. Set yourself deadlines. Don't work on things until they're done. There's no such thing as done when it comes to game development. Development is over when you say it is. When you feel like you are failing, don't take that as a sign that you shouldn't be here, that you shouldn't be doing this. Take it as an opportunity to learn. Scope smaller, get help, ship games that are broken. You're gonna do so many great things. All you have to do to get started is run out of excuses. Good luck.